The rain in London, they say, is a metaphor, a constant gray drizzle that reflects the mood of a nation, especially when it comes to the royal family. And on this particular day, as William, Prince of Wales, stood at the window of Kensington Palace, watching the downpour blur the manicured gardens, the metaphor felt almost too on the nose. He wasn't just seeing rain, he was seeing the weight of history, the burden of expectation, and the persistent gnawing problem that was his brother Harry. It had started, as these things often do, with a letter. Not a handwritten missive, sealed with wax and delivered by a royal courier, but a sterile digital communication, appearing on his phone screen like any other email. The subject line, however, was anything but ordinary. Correspondence regarding the Duke of Sussex. William knew, even before he opened it, that this wouldn't be good news. Harry's emails were rarely bearers of joy. The excerpt was brief, but its implications were seismic. Harry, it seemed, was considering bringing Archie and Lilibet back to England for their education. Boarding school, specifically. A traditional English education, steeped in the values that, according to Harry, were somehow lacking in their sun-drenched California upbringing. William scoffed. This wasn't about the children, it was about Harry. It was about his insatiable need for attention, his desperate attempt to claw his way back into the spotlight, back into the very institution he had so publicly denounced. For years, William had tried to understand his brother's motivations. He had extended olive branches, offered support, even defended Harry against the more vitriolic attacks from the British press. But each gesture had been met with suspicion, resentment, and ultimately betrayal. Harry had become a master of playing the victim, of twisting narratives to suit his own agenda, of painting the royal family as the villains in his personal drama. And William was tired of it. He knew instinctively that this latest proposal was a calculated move. Harry's popularity in the United States was waning. The Netflix deal was rumored to be on shaky ground. The carefully crafted image of the woke, enlightened prince was starting to crack under the weight of its own contradictions. He needed a new narrative, a new angle. And what better way to garner sympathy than to portray himself as a devoted father, yearning to reconnect his children with their heritage, battling against the cold, unfeeling institution that had cast him out. William's first call was to Princess Anne. Practical, pragmatic, and utterly devoid of sentimentality, Anne was the royal family's rock. She had seen it all, weathered every scandal, and always offered clear, unflinching advice. He's planning a return, William told her, his voice tight with controlled anger. And he's using the children as leverage. Anne's response was immediate and unwavering. I've seen this before. Not from Harry, but from Meghan. William knew she was right, at least in part. Meghan Markle had undoubtedly played a role in shaping Harry's narrative, in fueling his resentment, in encouraging his rebellion. But William also knew that Harry was ultimately responsible for his own actions. He was a grown man, capable of making his own choices. And he had chosen this path, a path that led him further and further away from his family, his country, and his responsibilities. As William prepared to confront the latest chapter in this ongoing saga, he couldn't help but feel a deep sense of sadness. He had lost his brother not to death, but to something far more insidious: ambition, resentment, and a relentless pursuit of fame. And as the rain continued to fall, he wondered if there was any way to salvage what was left of their relationship, or if they were destined to remain forever divided, on opposite sides of an ever-widening chasm. Charles, weakened but ever the optimist, saw things differently. He yearned for reconciliation, for the image of a united family, a balm for the relentless scrutiny and the constant whispers about the monarchy's relevance. He envisioned Sunday lunches at Windsor, the grandchildren running through the halls, a semblance of normalcy restored after years of turmoil. "He's still my son," Charles had pleaded, his voice raspy with illness and a father's enduring hope. "I don't ask you to forgive him. I just ask you to soften." Softening, however, was not in William's nature, at least not when it came to matters of the crown. He saw Harry's actions as a direct threat to the institution, a betrayal of the unspoken pact that bound them together. He couldn't afford to be sentimental. He had a kingdom to protect. The meeting at Sandringham solidified William's resolve. They would set conditions, boundaries so rigid that Harry would be forced to choose between his ambition and his family. Meghan was the key. Her presence in the UK was a lightning rod for controversy, a guaranteed media frenzy. She would be barred from any official royal events, any public appearances. Harry, too, would be silenced. No interviews, no documentaries, no more airing of grievances. He would be allowed to enroll his children in British schools, but only under the strictest terms of engagement. News of the conditions reached Harry in Los Angeles with the force of a physical blow. He paced his office, the California sun mocking his confinement. Meghan watched him, her expression unreadable. She had seen this coming, perhaps even orchestrated it. Her silence was a weapon, a subtle form of retribution for his constant betrayals. For the kids, Harry mumbled, trying to justify his decision. "It's the best thing for them," Meghan scoffed. "Or is it the best thing for you, Harry? A chance to rewrite your narrative, to play the wounded hero?" He couldn't deny the truth in her words. He craved the validation, the redemption, the chance to prove that he was more than just a spare, a footnote in royal history. But he also genuinely believed that his children deserved a connection to their heritage, a chance to experience the traditions and values that had shaped his own life. He accepted the conditions, at least on the surface. He signed the agreement knowing that he was sacrificing his own voice, his own agency. But in the back of his mind, a plan was forming. He would use the children's return to England as a springboard, a way to subtly re-enter the public consciousness, to remind the world of his existence, his relevance. He would play the long game, slowly chipping away at the walls that had been erected around him. Meanwhile, in London, William braced himself for the inevitable fallout. He knew that Harry wouldn't abide by the agreement for long. He was too restless, too ambitious, too desperate for attention. It was only a matter of time before he broke the rules, before he once again used his family as pawns in his personal game. And when that happened, William would be ready. He would shut the door on Harry for good, severing all ties, ensuring that he could no longer pose a threat to the monarchy. The rain continued to fall, a relentless reminder of the storm that was brewing on the horizon. The reframing began subtly. A carefully placed article in People magazine highlighting Harry's dedication to his children. Paparazzi shots of him playing soccer with Archie, pushing Lilibet on a swing. He was the doting dad, the loving father, the man who simply wanted what was best for his kids. Then came the whispers. Sources close to Harry revealed his deep longing for his homeland, his sadness at being separated from his family, his unwavering commitment to serving the greater good. He was the exiled prince, misunderstood and unfairly maligned, yearning to return to the fold. William watched the charade unfold with a mixture of disgust and resignation. He knew Harry was playing a game, manipulating the media, preying on the public's sympathy, but he also knew that Harry was good at it. He had a knack for crafting narratives, for portraying himself as the victim, for eliciting empathy from even the most cynical observers. The documentary project was the tipping point. William received a leaked copy of the pitch deck, a slick presentation outlining Harry's vision for a multi-part series exploring his life, his struggles, his triumph. It was a carefully curated blend of truth and fiction, designed to paint Harry as a hero, a visionary, a man ahead of his time. The proposed title was The Abandoned Son. The character description was even more inflammatory. A son of the kingdom cast out for choosing love and truth, battling against the forces of tradition and oppression. William slammed the pitch deck onto his desk, his hands trembling with rage. This wasn't about the children. It was about Harry's ego, his insatiable need for validation. He summoned his advisors, his inner circle, the people he trusted most to guide him through this crisis. They debated their options, weighed the pros and cons of each course of action. Some urged him to ignore Harry, to let him fade into obscurity. Others argued for a more aggressive approach, a public denouncement of his brother's lies. William chose a different path. He wouldn't engage in a mudslinging contest. He wouldn't stoop to Harry's level. He would simply present the truth calmly, rationally, without emotion. He authorized the release of a carefully worded statement, highlighting the conditions of Harry's return, the limitations on his public activities, the expectation of privacy for his children. The statement was a masterstroke. It exposed Harry's hypocrisy, his willingness to exploit his family for personal gain. It reminded the public that he had broken his promises, violated their trust. The tide began to turn. The media, once sympathetic to Harry's plight, started to question his motives. The public, once captivated by his charm, began to see him for what he was, a self-absorbed narcissist obsessed with his own image. Harry's carefully constructed narrative began to unravel. The The documentary project stalled. Investors pulled out. His popularity plummeted. He was isolated, alone, adrift in a sea of his own making. Meghan, too, began to distance herself. She had always been a pragmatist, a survivor, a woman who knew how to play the game. But she had also believed in Harry, in his vision, in his potential. Now, she saw him for what he truly was, a broken man consumed by his own demons. She left him quietly, without fanfare, without recriminations. She simply packed her bags and walked away, leaving him to face the consequences of his actions. He was the abandoned son, not of the royal family, but of his own making. Eaton's rejection stung, a paper cut to the soul. It wasn't the school itself, but the finality, the slam of a very old, very heavy door. 3 more schools followed suit, each polite decline echoing the same unspoken truth. He was toxic. The House of Windsor might forgive eventually, but the gatekeepers of British society, those who truly held the keys to power and influence, had made their judgment. The media, predictably, feasted. From victim to villain, the Sussex spiral blared one headline. The narrative had flipped, the tide turned with a ferocity that left Harry reeling. He was no longer the wronged prince, the courageous rebel, but a manipulator, a fraud, a man who had exploited his family for personal gain. The investors fled. The documentary, once a guaranteed hit, became a liability, a project too radioactive for any reputable studio to touch. The PR firm, the team of image makers who had promised to resurrect his reputation, vanished like ghosts, leaving behind only unpaid invoices and a lingering sense of betrayal. He was alone, stripped bare, exposed to the harsh light of public scrutiny. He had nothing left to offer, no story to tell, no one to blame but himself. William's statement was brief, almost clinical. Family is the soil in which trust grows. When that trust rots, blood alone cannot restore it. No names, no accusations, just a simple, devastating truth. The message was clear. Harry was no longer welcome. The study in Montecito felt like a tomb. The photographs, once carefully arranged to project an image of domestic bliss, had been removed, not in anger, but in resignation. The oak desk, where he had once dreamed of rewriting history, gathered dust, a monument to his failed ambitions. He sat in silence, staring blankly at the wall. The chair beside him, Meghan's chair, remained empty, a constant reminder of his loss. She wouldn't return. She had seen the truth, the emptiness at his core, the insatiable hunger for attention that had driven him to betray everything he held dear. On the table lay the abandoned screenplay, its title A Cruel Joke, The Unchosen Son. He laughed, a dry, hollow sound that echoed in the empty room. Even that label, that badge of wounded pride, had been taken from him. He was no longer the unchosen son. He was simply irrelevant. Outside, Archie and Lilibet played in the garden, their laughter innocent and untainted by the drama that had consumed their parents' lives. He checked his watch. Nearly noon. No meetings, no calls, no offers from across the sea, only silence. He had once belonged to something vast, something powerful, something that had defined him since birth. But that past was gone, a shell, empty and meaningless. The chair beside him remained vacant, like a question no one cared to answer. The sun beat down on Montecito, indifferent to his pain, his failure, his utter and complete isolation. The game was over. He had lost. Across the manicured lawns, a nanny shepherded Archie and Lilibet towards the house, their small voices echoing. He watched them approach, their innocence a stark contrast to the wreckage he had created. He was their father. And he had failed them. He had sought to secure their future, to give them a connection to their heritage, but he had only succeeded in making them pawns in his own desperate game. He rose and walked to meet them, forcing a smile as they ran towards him. He scooped them up in his arms, inhaling their sweet scent, clinging to the only connection that still felt real. They chattered about their games, oblivious to the storm that had ravaged their family. He listened, his heart aching with a remorse that threatened to consume him. Later that evening, after the children were asleep, he found himself drawn to the small recording studio behind the house. It was a space he had once envisioned as a sanctuary, a place where he could express his truth, tell his story, reclaim his narrative. Now, it felt like a cage, a reminder of his broken promises, his shattered dreams. He sat at the mixing console, the cold metal a stark contrast to the warmth of his skin. He scrolled through the files on the hard drive, a graveyard of abandoned projects, half-finished interviews, and unreleased footage. He paused on a folder labeled Windsor Dinner. He hesitated, his fingers hovering over the mouse. He knew what was inside: the full audio recording of his disastrous meeting with Charles and William, the evidence of his betrayal, the final nail in the coffin of his royal ambitions. He had intended to use it, to leak it to the press, to expose William's coldness, to paint himself as the victim of a ruthless power struggle. But now, he wasn't so sure. He clicked play. The voices of his father and brother filled the room, their words echoing with a pain and disappointment that cut deeper than any insult. He heard his own voice, smooth and calculated, spinning a web of half-truths and self-serving justifications. He cringed, ashamed of his own duplicity. He listened to the end, his heart heavy with regret. He had been so consumed by his own ambition, so blinded by his own ego, that he had failed to see the damage he was inflicting on his family. He had sacrificed their trust, their love, their respect, all for the sake of a fleeting moment of glory. He stopped the recording and sat in silence, his head in his hands. He had reached the bottom, the point of no return. He had lost everything. He knew what he had to do. It wouldn't undo the damage he had caused, but it was the only way to begin to repair the wreckage. He opened his laptop and began to type. The email was addressed to William. It was short, direct, and brutally honest. He didn't offer excuses. He didn't seek forgiveness. He simply acknowledged his mistakes. He admitted that he had been wrong, that he had allowed his ambition to cloud his judgment, that he had betrayed his family's trust. He promised to stop. He would withdraw from the public eye. He would cease all media activities. He would focus on raising his children in privacy and peace. He wouldn't seek to rewrite history. He wouldn't try to reclaim his position. He wouldn't attempt to manipulate the narrative. He would simply disappear. He ended the email with a single sentence: "I am sorry." He hesitated, his finger hovering over the send button. He knew that this email wouldn't magically erase the past, that it wouldn't restore his relationship with his brother, that it wouldn't undo the pain he had caused. But it was a start. It was a small act of contrition, a gesture of humility, a sign that he was finally ready to face the truth. He clicked send. Across the Atlantic, in the rain-soaked halls of Kensington Palace, William received the email. He read it slowly, his expression unreadable. He had heard Harry's apologies before, promises that had always been broken. But something about this email felt different, more sincere, more desperate. He didn't reply. He simply closed his laptop and turned to the window, watching the rain fall on the manicured gardens. He didn't know if he could ever forgive Harry, if he could ever trust him again, but he knew that something had shifted, that the balance of power had changed. Harry was no longer a threat. He was simply a broken man, adrift in a sea of his own making. The rain continued to fall, washing away the remnants of the past, clearing the way for a new beginning. Whether that beginning would bring reconciliation or continued division remained to be seen. But for the first time in a long time, William felt a glimmer of hope. Perhaps, just perhaps, there was still a chance for peace.